let's not put any more money in this. Let's actually run some ads and see that it works. And I think sometimes you can kind of become too sort of engrossed in that product development side that it's like, have you had that validation from the market? So yeah, my advice would be to try and keep costs low until you figure out, okay, this is something that people, really want.
Anthony, how's it going, man?
Hey man, how's it going?
Good to see you. It's been a while. I'm glad we're doing this and making it happen.
Yeah.
You are. Yeah. So you're in the UK right now.
Yeah, so I'm back. I'm back in London. It's actually sunny for a change, which is good.
Beautiful. Are you planning on traveling more, or we met in Mexico? Is that like a one-time thing, or are you planning on continuing to travel a bit?
Yeah, I mean that's still on the agenda. The way I usually like to do it is maybe 3-4 months away somewhere and then come back for a similar amount of time. Usually that's enough, before I want to head out again. But I kind of find having a sort of like going to one place, spending a bit of time there, not traveling too quickly, just kind of, setting up shop, and then sort of coming back home to integrate that and figure out, what just happened. Essentially, that's sort of the cycle. And it's been working. I think that's the plan. What about you, man? You're going to, where are you off to next? Guatemala?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know for sure. So, Mexico, I need to take a page out of your book. I've been moving a little too fast. But after Mexico, I felt like, okay, I need to go like chill for a minute. So I came here to North Carolina to chill. And then I'm going to be going to, I think Guatemala, but we'll see what I feel in a month.
Okay, nice. So just somewhere out of the States.
South
America, yeah. Specifically.
I think so, as I want to stay in like these time zones.
Right, got ya.
So Anthony, your background is in e-commerce specifically. Like that's your area. How did you fall into that? How did that happen?
Yeah, so I was working at an agency at the time in Amsterdam. This is a few years ago now. And at the time, I was kind of working as a strategist. And I was seeing a couple friends of mine, like my friend and his brother. They're close friends now, both of them. And, I was just seeing them doing all this dropshipping stuff. And they were just, traveling the world, kind of doing it there, like, from the outset, just looking at them like, wow, like, what is it you guys are doing? Because I think at that time, especially, this sort of whole digital nomad thing has it wasn't as prevalent as it is now. And, I was just kind of looking at them. I was like, okay, well, I just want to sort of figure out, what you guys have done essentially. And kind of reached out to one of them. We kind of chatted about it a lot. And it kind of transpired that I ended up going to live with them in Colombia for a few months. And really kind of got like a masterclass, in marketing. These guys have been deep in the space for years.
Wait, is this Jamie?
Jamie's been around, man. He's been like deep in like in the MLM.
This is the
stuff.
same guy though?
Yeah. It's Jamie.
Okay, sorry, continue.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I know. Yeah, but he's actually, when it comes to marketing stuff, he's really he's really a top level guy. Like he was helping. There was a guy called Dave Wood who was like one of the OG MLM guys back in like 2013, and he was the brains behind that operation. So yeah, kind of like had a bit of a just complete overhaul on my e-commerce experience, like totally different from what I'd learned at the agency. A lot more, essentially there's this entrepreneurial element where, you're just controlling the whole aspect, every part of the business, right? It's not just, like the ads or one thing that you've been hired for. It's just everything. So it was kind of a complete lesson.
So what were you doing specifically? Like, did you have your own company that you were doing this for, or?
Yeah. At the time, so when I went over to, to work with them, essentially, we had a few different brands that we kind of set up, and it was more like drop shipping stuff, essentially. So what that would be is, the fidget spinners are the kind of like quintessential product, but there were literally, thousands of these, and that we would kind of be, searching the depths of, AliExpress, Alibaba to find, okay, what is this next product that's just going to hit big? And yeah, that was kind of my starting point with the e-commerce. And we essentially found a few products, and it's always the ones that you would least expect. You're just like, this is just no one's going to buy that. But the world's a funny place, man. You never quite know. You think you've got it, and then it's just another product that kind of blows it out of the water.
So let's talk about dropshipping for a second. This is something I'm curious about, and I told you that. So when I was in college, everyone was getting into dropshipping, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a stab at it. So I went on Alibaba and I bought like 1,000 of these phone cases.
Yeah.
And I tried selling them on Shopify, and my customer acquisition cost was like $70 to sell like a $40 phone case.
Yeah.
So that sucked. So I ended up just like selling them up on like, yeah, no. So I ended up just selling them on like Facebook Marketplace and OfferUp, and it's like Craigslist.
Yeah.
So that was a failure. What makes a dropshipping product like successful? Like, is it all about the marketing? Is it about having a variety of products? What are some of the variables that lead to success?
Yeah, well, I think certainly understanding the sort of total addressable market. I think one thing, probably the biggest mistake that I see marketers make in general, when they're actually trying to advertise to their audience, is that they're going like far too broad. They're just thinking, okay, it's for sort of women aged 18 to 35, but they're not really looking at it like, okay, who's actually going to buy this product? So, really looking at what are the things that are going to move the needle, and what is going to, make the audience like buy this essentially. So I'd say that's the first thing. And then, really just having like a good understanding of the whole business as a whole, essentially. So not just looking at, what, like, is it a product that people like? Does it work, economically? Like, what are the margins? I think, again, sometimes you can have really good products, but if the margins just are not working, it's just not scalable, essentially. So that would be another one.
Is dropshipping still viable today? Like, I always hear people say dropshipping is dead. Is that true?
Yes and no. It's certainly getting harder, and I wouldn't advise people to do it. It can work. There's still products that are like popping up, but it's getting more difficult. Essentially, acquisition cost is going up. It's harder and harder. People in general are becoming more distrusting of those kind of brands, which is sort of the main reason why it might work. You might hit a product that could make some money, but as a business, no, because you're not really building anything that's sort of sustainable and that can actually grow. It can be a nice little quick money maker, but if I was to say, is it like working, and is it the next business model, I'd say I think we've kind of passed the glory days of that.
It's funny though, because when you think about dropshipping as a business model, it's weird to think that a business model type can be saturated. Because when you think about like saturation in a market, you usually think about like a product that is like, okay, there's too many people in the web design space, so don't get into web design because that's saturated. That's a bad example. I'm in web design, but it's weird to think that like an entire method of acquiring and selling products can be saturated. And you're saying that that's tied to the acquisition costs of paid media rising. Is that right?
Yeah, that's definitely a factor. I mean, I think this idea that it's dead is maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but yeah, certainly the fact that it's just becoming more and more expensive to acquire a customer, doing it through the normal channels. So for example, like AliExpress, and essentially, I guess the reason why it wouldn't be sustainable is because, at least with a brand, what you're doing is you're actually you have a much higher acquisition cost potentially, but you also have the higher lifetime value because, they're actually repeat purchasing. And the thing about dropshipping, it's kind of like a churn and burn model, which I think is where, people can actually fall a bit short.
What do you mean when you say it's a churn and burn model?
Well, it's not, the customer experience honestly isn't incredible, which I think is what, customers are looking for more and more, is they want to have a good experience. You've got Amazon to compete with, which is, giving them the product the next day essentially. So
Right.
having a really good customer experience, throughout every touch point, whether that's speaking to customer service, how they receive their package, it's sort of integral to how people perceive the brand. And when you're doing drop shipping, typically anyway, it doesn't have those fast delivery times. It hasn't got necessarily the best product quality. So I think that's kind of where, you just don't see the same sort of return customer rate as you would with a brand that you're actually, building.
So customer acquisition costs are going up, lifetime value of each customer is going down. As you so eloquently said earlier, those are bad numbers. What about this trend of print on demand? I'm seeing a lot of that. Is that another fad, or is that something that you think is here to stay?
Again, I mean, it would essentially just be one type, like one aspect of drop shipping. I haven't actually run any print on demand brands myself, but I would say that, of course, it can work like anything else. And yeah, it's almost more like a method of production essentially. So, you could have a fulfillment center in the UK doing print on demand to a UK audience with a solid brand, and it would be flourishing. So I would say print on demand in of itself is good to go, I would say.
Okay. Okay, cool. There's a lot of changes happening right now
Yes.
with the marketing space. That's a really broad sentence, but specifically paid media, because most of when we talk about paid media, we're usually talking about Google and Facebook.
Yep.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what's going on with like iOS 14 and how that's impacting? I know that it's happening, but because I operate in an industry that's like tangentially related, but
Yep.
I don't really run ads for e-commerce businesses. So tell me, like, what's going on?
Yeah, well, I mean, this has kind of been this impending doom, right, for most marketers in the last, I would say, about 6 months. It's kind of been on the horizon, and essentially, what's happened is that Apple have placed a restriction on iPhone users to what privacy settings they ask of their customers. So it's now essentially you have to opt in to see the ads, and it makes it much less likely that people are, gonna opt in for that. So what that means in terms of Facebook advertising is it's much harder to actually run a campaign and get the same level of data as you would previously. So, when it comes to attribution, for example, it used to be 30 days, and now it's 7 days, and it's quite limited in what that 7 days actually offers.
Oh, I see. So it's like, okay, so if someone sees a Facebook ad, right?
Yeah.
And then they click on it and then they go to
Yeah.
your website and they make the purchase in that moment, you can still capture that data. And if they make it within 7 days, like, and they come back to the app, they can still attribute that to the Facebook ad. But what you're saying is it's that 8 to 30 day window that we're losing.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, if you actually get the sale, then you'll still be able to track it because you'd have the customer info, from the purchase essentially, which you could see through Shopify. But your point is still 100% valid. So yeah, you wouldn't be able to see, what's going on past that point. So it kind of leaves a lot of advertisers in the dark in terms of, how to scale their campaigns if they haven't got a longer sort of vision of what's going on.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And because of the way that Facebook works, and Google as well, Facebook getting less data isn't just a measurement problem, it's an optimization problem, because those platforms also improve themselves based on the customer data that they're collecting based on your transactions.
Yeah, I
Is that
hadn't.
accurate?
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Okay. One thing you told me once that I want to ask about, you mentioned that one of the metrics in Facebook when you're looking at like running campaigns for an e-commerce business is return on ad spend. ROAS.
Yeah.
So that for for people who aren't familiar, that's how Facebook measures for every dollar you spend on Facebook ads, you get say $3 back on your Shopify store. So your ROAS would be 3. Anthony, you told me that you think that metric is overrated. I think I can kind of see where you're going with that. Why do you say that?
Yeah, well, I think people can come a little bit obsessed with ROAS. They'll it's become a bit of a joke almost in the sort of Facebook ads world. Is people post their results and they might have 100x return on ad spend, which is ridiculous when you look at it. It's like, oh wow, for every dollar I spend, I'm getting 1,000 out. But what you actually look at it is maybe they've got 3 purchases or something. And I've also seen people posting they've had like a 10x return on ad spend with, again, like a few sales. And they're just they're just so obsessed with this number of, okay, I've got 10 return. How can I keep that number? But obviously, if you look at it in terms of the whole business, it's like what are the big numbers that we actually need? It's like, what is the revenue, and ultimately what is the profit going to be? So when people are looking at these, they're not optimized for scale, and there can be different goals or sort of priorities that people have as a business, but generally, if you're looking to actually scale and grow, and you can kind of understand that if the more customers that you acquire, you could also upsell them on the back end, then you really start to look at that a little bit differently. And you could almost say if you've got a ROAS that's too high, it means you're not scaling aggressively enough, because there's a lot more customers that you could be acquiring.
So if you're saying that if it's like a short-sighted metric, because it doesn't take into account the lifetime value of the customer, it takes into account the first purchase that they make in that 7-day attribution window.
Yeah, and I think you almost have to look at it like, if you imagine some of the bigger companies, right, like Nike in terms of their important metrics, they're not reporting at the end of the year, oh, this was our return on ad spend. They're saying this is our revenue, this is our profit and loss, this is what we're giving to our shareholders. Like, those are the numbers I think that are important. And it doesn't really matter at any level whether it's a big multinational company or it's a local mum and pop store. I think that should still be the objective, at least from a financial perspective, rather than what's the return on ad spend.
It's funny, you're absolutely right. It's totally a way that Facebook justifies to you spending money on their platform.
Yeah,
that's what it's got to be.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of that.
There is a lot of that.
Yeah.
And another thing you said that I think is interesting is that if your ROAS is too high, you're probably not being aggressive enough. You're not scaling enough, because as you scale a campaign, tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm speaking out of school here a little bit, but as you scale a Facebook ad campaign, your return on ad spend is going to decrease. So if it's too high, you're focused too narrowly on short term, or your business model doesn't have a long tail, like lifetime value. So it should be decreasing as you scale. Am I understanding that point correctly?
Typically it would decrease. And I think that's where you've really just got to understand your sort of bottom level, like your bottom line numbers. So it may be that, let's say, the return on ad spend, like absolute minimum you'd have to get would be 1.4, right? So for every $1 you spend, you're getting 140 back. That's kind of the basic idea. But essentially what that would mean is that really you don't want to be going much over 2, because if you're scaling it hard and you're really getting the most out of your campaign and getting that like aggressive customer acquisition, assuming that's what you're trying to do, right, then I think you've got to look at it a little bit kind of conversely, I guess, to what's the common approach to it.
Sure, yeah. And I think that's an important point here. Like, when you're talking about return on ad spend, you're actually only talking about the cost of acquiring a customer. You're not talking about the lifetime value. So
yes, true.
In that vein, like, what other channels are viable right now for like acquiring new customers with paid media? Is Google the only one? I know you do some stuff with TikTok. Like, what platforms do you use?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the just that kind of uncertainty that's been creeping in about Facebook at the moment with all the stuff that's going on has led a lot of advertisers, myself included, to start looking at some different channels. So for us, we've kind of ventured more into TikTok. We're giving that a go, trying to figure out how that works exactly. I think the next step would probably be Snapchat. That's like a nice extension. And probably a bit further down the line, actually going into the native stuff as well. I think there's huge potential with native, but it's just about like doing it at a step at a time. But I think there's a couple advantages of that. The first is that you're diversifying your risk, right? You're not all on Facebook. If your ad account gets shut down, that's not the end of your business. And the second reason is that you're not just you're not just on Facebook, you're also on these other channels. And what can happen is that people start seeing you around as this sort of ubiquitous brand, and they might not buy from you from one channel, but they'll kind of Google you, they'll see that you've got presence there. And once you've got that sort of like presence in the market, that's when you get a little bit more memorable.
So you said a term there that I'm not familiar with. When you say native ads, what are you talking about?
So native would be anything, if you're on, if you're just on like a WordPress site, like or like CNN News or whatever, like New York Post, you're going to get banner ads. There's a few different types of ads that you'd be seeing, on the website itself, and that's just that's coming through native essentially.
Gotcha. So like on Google, it's called display.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I understand. Cool.
Yeah.
So TikTok and Snapchat, those are interesting ones. Let's start with Snapchat. What kind of stuff are you seeing on Snapchat that's working?
Well, to be honest, we haven't gone into Snapchat yet. That's kind of the next step. It's been more TikTok, but what I can speak to that is it's certainly just there's a lot to kind of get your head around. Like even some of the language that's used on the platform. I don't know. Are you a heavy TikToker?
I think I'll understand what you're talking about.
Right. Okay. I think we're kind of on the cusp of the sort of generational cusp of TikTok, where it kind of makes sense, but not really. Yeah. That's how I feel about it anyway.
I think you're older than me, so.
Okay. So for me anyway, I was kind of looking at all these terms that people are using on TikTok. Like that was the first time I really felt old, and it's just to see what are the actual what is the way that they kind of communicate, and how is that different to slightly older audiences. That was the first thing, and we were seeing from running some of these ads is there can be quite a lot of trolls on the comments. They don't hold back, so you've really got to be on it and engage with the community in a way. Like if someone's saying something funny on the ad, right, or anything that you're running, you want to be right back there having a conversation with them, saying something kind of witty as well. Otherwise, you can't let them have the last laugh, I guess, in this in this example.
You've kind of got to hire like some edgy social media manager for
just someone that's a little bit of sass,
It's like every account is Wendy's Twitter account.
Pretty much, yeah. We need a bit of that, I think, a bit of fire.
That's fun. So are you running paid ads on TikTok, or is it mainly like organic content that you're just...
Yeah, so we're actually running a little bit of both. So we're doing some influencer marketing, and then we're using that influencer marketing in the paid ads. Because what we've found is, influencer can work great, but with the sort of firepower, if you will, of the Facebook ads or of the TikTok ads in this case, really having a sort of recognizable face or brand that you can use as that social proof just makes the ads work even better. So just and if you would just have ads on its own, it just doesn't have, the same effect. So yeah, we've been having a lot of, it's been working well for us.
Does it work for all companies or all brands, or is it really only specific brands that are targeted towards younger audiences?
I think it can be pretty broad. Like, we were running a campaign a while ago it was like a car manufacturer essentially. And, they're even this was back when we were doing more like YouTube ads. And believe it or not, there are some pretty big like car influencers, that you can use who are talking about like DIY, and it still seemed to work. So you'd be surprised, man.
Wow.
Yeah.
How is TikTok's ad platform? Last I heard about it was like 5-6 months ago, and I was hearing it was really still figuring out what it wanted to be when it grew up. How is it now?
Well, in terms of the back end, it's almost identical to Facebook. They've obviously made it, like they've kind of changed some of the names, maybe for copyright reasons. But in terms of the sort of back end, they really just made it as easy as possible to migrate as many Facebook advertisers onto TikTok without any hiccups. So I think there'll be a lawsuit pending.
There's going to be a few, I think. So
yeah.
What's the targeting like?
Well, that's actually one of the things that they recommend when you're running the ads. Usually, if you're doing it on Facebook, you optimize more for you have like one conversion option, so you always do it for conversions. Whereas with TikTok, they sort of recommend you do some top of funnel traffic campaigns, you do add to carts, you do conversions as well. So honestly, I don't think that the algorithms are sophisticated as Facebook yet. We've been running some broad stuff just to kind of like just to populate and figure out where we want to run the ad specifically. But I think in general, it's just not as built out yet. But I'm hoping that they'll figure it out sooner rather than later.
So I know one thing you said is that like detailed targeting on Facebook is overrated. Like maybe I'm putting words in your mouth there, but I think you said something like that to me about how like you don't want to be too narrow with your targeting on Facebook. Is that A, did you say that, or am I making that up? And B, is it similar on TikTok? Do you have the ability to target pretty narrowly, like by interests and demographics and all that good stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say, you can have some specificity with it, but I think in general, if I was to look at how most campaigns are run, there is this almost like obsession with finding your perfect audience. Like, okay, I'm going to be running this from, these are 21 to 26-year-olds who like to read this or this magazine, or they shop there. And, what happens is you're going to have such a small audience that it just makes it so expensive to run that ad. The way that you really call out someone that works, that actually is a good, that is a good person for your ad, is if you have good copy, good creative, you can really like figure out how you want to target them rather than just going super specific. You can go much broader. Facebook algorithm is, smarter than we are when it comes to trying to figure out who the buyers are.
Yeah, fair enough. Better let the robots and supercomputers figure out who we need to be targeting.
Yeah.
That's definitely interesting. So what are your thoughts on funnel optimization? I know you have some thoughts on that subject specifically.
Yeah, well, I think there's a little bit of this idea of building
funnels. And actually,
funnels.
I'm sorry, would you define that first for people who aren't familiar?
Yeah, sure. So a funnel essentially, a marketing funnel would just be bringing, it's the full customer journey that you're bringing a user through. So from their first touch point, which might be their Facebook ad, or they might see you on TV or Google, whichever kind of channel that they see you on. And then, they'll kind of come to your website and then be a buyer. That's this traditional idea of a funnel. And I think what happens when you look at it as a funnel is that you kind of miss this idea that actually these different touch points are interrelated. So someone might see you on an ad and then they'll go into a store, or they'll see you on a store and then you'll start getting targeted for their ads. So it's less about kind of trying to take them from A to B, but it's more almost, if you kind of look at it like as a web, where each factor kind of feeds into the other ones. Ultimately, they might purchase it and then they're still talking about it to their friends. It's not just the end of the sort of buyer cycle.
That's a different answer than it's a more sophisticated answer, I would say, than most people give. But I think you're correct. Like, that makes sense. All right, so now tell me a little bit about your funnel optimization.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of, well, at least that's sort of how I think about it. Like, you've got the regular funnels. That's how most people are looking at the funnels. But the way we're doing it is we're looking at it more kind of, we're looking at that whole picture. And then that, you really have to kind of be deep in Google Analytics, trying to figure out not just what traffic's going from here, but it's actually how does it all kind of piece together. So it's a lot of finagling in Google Analytics, Google Data Studio, to really understand, like, how does one lever affect, the whole system? Because if you were to say, like, a lot of times people are obsessed, let's say, with, lowering the CPA, which is the cost per acquisition, right? And then to do that, they'll want to increase the click-through rate, so have more people clicking on the ad. But that's not an isolated event. There's also going to be an effect on the conversion rate on the website. So it all kind of, because the traffic that you're getting isn't as good. So it all fits together. It's not like, you just boost the click-through rate and the rest of the funnel isn't also affected.
So if you do some kind of cheap trick to to improve one metric like click-through, it could have a negative impact on another metric like conversion rate. But that number 2 is just a facade, because it's the system as a whole that matters. It's not any specific number, and you shouldn't be focused. So how do you even go about measuring it? Is it just that cost per acquisition?
Well, ultimately, that's probably one of the most important metrics. Like, if we're looking at, the margins on the product, like what the cost of the goods are, we want to have like a nice cushy margin, so that the acquisition cost gives us enough room to, pay for everything else and then keep on growing. So we try and at least have that as, I would say, probably as a key metric. Probably more so, it's similar to ROAs, but I think there's some distinctions.
Sure. What other levers would you pull to try and optimize those numbers? You mentioned click through. Is it just all those marketing stats like cost per impression, click through? Are those the numbers you're talking about, or are there other things you're thinking about?
Yeah, well, I would say on the front end, there's a lot you can do with the ads itself, right? So testing, we're always going to be testing just like a bunch of different creative, a bunch of different copy, because you never quite know. Again, similar with the dropshipping, it's like, what's the one that's actually gonna convert? And it may surprise you. It may be this kind of ad that you wrote like on the fly, didn't kind of think about it too much. But in general, there is some kind of system to it. You want to find ads that are that catch people's attention, that bring people through a bit of a story themselves. You could more or less guess what's going to do well and what's just going to completely bomb. So then the rest is sort of in the middle, just like trying to tweak it.
One piece of advice I was given is that when you're running, and this is like a trend I've noticed, I'm not the first person to say this, but on all of these platforms, Facebook and Google specifically, they want you now to give them like 15 headlines, 15 descriptions, 15 images, and instead of running split tests, they want you to just let them run with it and just mix and match. Do you do that, or do you still like split test manually to get your own data and like tell the algorithm to figure it out
usually
later?
We'll do it automatically. So what you're talking about there is creative testing. So it's giving Facebook a bunch of different creatives that you can you just give it to Facebook and you just see which one it likes the most. And the advantage of that is it's going to spend the money on the one that it thinks is the most like has the best chance of doing well. But I think what can often happen is that it gets allocated quite quickly So it might test these copies, and one that shows some early sign of success, it will just allocate all the budget to that one. Whereas actually, when you're first starting out, it can be good if you say, all right, I want to spend at least $50 on this creative in this ad, and I want to spend $50 on this one, so I can really get a proper split test. I think that's kind of when we would do it at the start, just to see, what's actually has some, like, have a fair test, basically.
Fair enough. Yeah. And I think similarly, like I would want to have at least what I would consider a fair test. But then I guess it comes down to like you said earlier, these algorithms know so much. Like, how do we know what a fair test is? But
yeah,
I feel like you're right. There couldn't be any harm in at least putting $50 in a couple of different variants.
Are you doing any Facebook ads? How are you getting your clients in?
So yeah, it's different than it is for e-commerce, but I still have like a funnel, right? So we've got like these. The one that I'm running right now is like there's a video of me talking like, hey, come to this like little webinar thing. And it's an automated recording of me giving people some tips, and then they can sign up for a session at the end of it with me, and then on that session I upsell them on a project.
Okay, nice. And the service is all around web development. So is it specifically on WordPress? Is that right?
Yeah, we're more like business to business companies. We do some e-commerce stuff, but because we're a WordPress shop, like Shopify is kind of where it's at for that. So we'll work with companies that won't get accepted onto Shopify, like cannabis companies and other kinds of industries. But,
okay, but
for
the
most part, our
still within e-commerce or just whatever, any company that needs a website that's B2B.
Very rarely do we do e-commerce. We do probably one e-commerce a month, maybe one every 2 months. Most of it's like financial services, lawyers, doctors, not nice. Doctors sometimes, but yeah. It's I like e-commerce. I've in like past iterations of this company, I've focused on it a lot more. But I found that it's easier to the kind of like upkeep that a Shopify site needs like is kind of complicated. So I found that it would be easier to set up systems around WordPress.
Yeah, that makes sense. And probably also it's a clearer distinction in what you're doing, right? Because it can sometimes get a little bit messy. I could imagine if you're a Shopify web development agency, it's like, who's taking the pictures, who's writing, like there can be some intricacies where someone doesn't write like these product tags or something, and then suddenly that's on the web agency. Whereas I feel like with WordPress, it's just like, okay, this is what we want. This is the content. Here you go. Or maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. You've got some more experience.
Different clients have different needs, but you're absolutely right. There's like so much that goes into having a successful e-commerce website. It's not just building the storefront, right? It's like you have to have like your email marketing set up, and your retargeting needs to be configured correctly. And how are you going to set it up with the fulfillment center? And what happens if someone abandons a cart? Like all those things need to be thought through. And I think I will go back into it at some point, but I want to make sure that I'm not winging those things. I want to be like methodical about like, okay, so we have a good strategy for that part and a good strategy for that part. So I figured when I was starting this, I thought, okay, let's focus on what I know how to do already really well every time.
Yeah.
That's why I picked the route that I did.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a complete abundance of people who need WordPress sites.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So it's a great industry. I really like it.
Yeah.
I've got some questions for you about new Shopify companies or new e-commerce companies, because I know one of the companies you work with, it's Ghost. I can't remember which one it is, but one of them creates e-commerce brands from scratch. Is that correct?
Yeah. So Ghost Studios, it's kind of it's in its infancy at the moment. We've got a women's health supplement that we're working on, and as well as a pregnancy brand that's kind of just coming into life now. So it's super early stages. I'm keeping it a little bit under the wraps at the moment, but what I can say is, we're working with a lot of these clients, for the agency, and kind of honestly just doing really well for them, right? Just having campaigns that were making them a lot of money, and got us thinking, all right, well, maybe this isn't so hard. Maybe we can try some of our brands for ourselves. So, while we have the agency, we're like, okay, well, we've got, this in-house team. of ad buyers and like influencer marketers who can scale campaigns really well. We just need to figure out the brand side, and we're good to go. And I think what that's kind of given us is a lot more. It's almost like a fun project at this point. It's like just throwing some stuff
Totally.
against the wall. But I mean, I think
But
it has a
typically
lot of
when you're working
potential.
with these brand, yeah, I'm sure it does. You guys definitely have like customer acquisition is the part that everyone's worried about when they start a company, and you guys know how to
Yeah.
do that. So typically when you're working with brands, like they're larger companies that have already got an established business, correct? Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, either an established business, or I mean, for one for example, it's like a PLC, so it's very established, but it's a new kind of brand. So we actually scaled them
Okay.
up, from zero, but typically it will be at some level already.
Okay. So how do you recommend someone gets started? Because it's a really daunting thing because you have to like let's break it down into bite-sized chunks, I guess. So you're starting these two or three, businesses right now, and we don't need to talk about those specific ones because I know you said it's under wraps, but when you're going through that process, how do you determine what to sell? Like what's the brand going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately you've got to be thinking about the numbers, and is this something that can scale? Is this something that you can build a bit of a community around? Can we reach the audience through the channels that we're trying to reach them on, right? We had a campaign we're running before for CGS Go players. I don't know if you're familiar with that, with Counter-Strike. And we were selling them knives. Essentially, that was the brand. But what we found is like we couldn't run ads on Facebook because they've got these knives which are banned. So we're like, okay, we've got to figure out where they are. In the end, we're running some ads on like Reddit, which worked in a way, but it's just not scalable. And it's like you have to have a good product, which they did have, but you've also got to be able to reach them. So that's kind of where we're starting to look more, seeing as Facebook is what we kind of specialize in, running ads to like audiences that really have a strong audience in that age group. So for example, we're looking more at women, slightly older women in general. So there's a lot of them on Facebook, right? So it kind of makes it easier.
Totally. That makes perfect sense. So the audience is what determines kind of the niche that you go into. And when an e-commerce brand is starting up, right, there's a couple of pieces that need to be figured out. There's the actual website that they need to do. Obviously, that's the first one I think of, right? But then there's also like fulfillment and branding, and marketing is probably the one that they're afraid of. So how do you go about acquiring your first customers? Do you do that before you start the company to like validate it? Like what goes on?
Yeah, there's a few ways you can do it. So if you have one good way to test, honestly, is if you source a good product from China. So let's say AliExpress, Alibaba, you could actually create some branding around that product, order a small batch of it, maybe like I would say 100 max to kind of start out. Sorry, but I think 1,000's tough from the get go. It can be done.
You should have seen my college house. I had like this stack of them.
I've got a lot of time for it. I have to say, it's a good. It shows good character.
I sold them, man.
I think that is a common mistake that people make. Is that they'll go out and they'll invest a lot. They'll get attached to the product. And I have to even be a little bit careful with one of the brands that we've got now. It's like we're sort of, the longer we've spent on it, the more we've become infatuated with this brand and thinking that it's gonna work really well. And it's like, wait, hold on a minute, let's not put any more money in this. Let's actually run some ads and see that it works. And I think sometimes you can kind of become too sort of engrossed in that product development side that it's like, have you had that validation from the market? So yeah, my advice would be to try and keep costs low before, like, until you figure out, okay, this is something that people, really want.
One thing that I read in like probably an old Tim Ferriss book was that he would run ads before he had the product to see if people
Yeah,
would buy them and see if the ad would work, and then he would just refund them and say, "Sorry, there was an issue. We can't
yeah,
do it."
yeah.
Would you ever try that, or do you think there's a problem with that?
Morally, you mean?
I mean, however you want to
Ethically,
slice it.
is morally? I think that there's. I haven't got a problem with it. I like the ingenuity behind it. To be honest,
Okay.
we've done it before, and it's a good way to kind of see, if there's bite. I think as long as you're like, if as long as you're refunding the product, right? I think there's no harm foul. If you just like, oh well, I'll just take the money, don't send it. That's where it's definitely going into
Yeah.
some ethically questionable behavior.
I
But
think
we
that's
always
I
we
think
always
that's
send out the product.
legally frowned upon.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So that's interesting. So before buying the 100 sample products, you could test the ads to see if you can effectively reach the audience, validate what you've determined with the numbers, and then build it up. So how much emphasis are you putting on the brand when you're first starting it? Do you like one thing that I always tell people who want to get into my industry, it's vastly different than yours, right? But like I tell people like don't worry about your brand at all when you're starting out freelancer or web designer or whatever because it doesn't matter. But I have a sense that it's probably different in your world.
yeah. Well, I think the first. So I mean, I can. It's not a complete secret, but the first product that we're launching, it's called Mind Love, and it's a women's health supplement for to help with anxiety, sleep. There's a few different products that we're launching, and the idea behind that was just trying to just see if we could validate it. We've slipped a little bit too much into product development mode and trying to make it look good, and I think that the standard's a little bit higher for that industry because if you look at the other products in that market, there's quite a high expectation of what a good luxury brand kind of looks like. But I think that's the main thing. If you're selling tires or something that solves a problem, there's really not going to be the same benchmark that you kind of need to hit. And in general, probably the best thing would be to get started before, just see what the reaction is before kind of going too deep into spending money on it.
That makes sense. Okay. So another thing that you do, not to completely pivot, but I want to see how this ties together. Another thing that you do is acquire e-commerce brands that are already running. So I want to talk about that in detail, but how important is the aesthetic of the brand and like the look and feel of it when you're making a purchase? Is that even a factor that you consider?
If I think it's becoming more and more important for sure, and in the right market, so lifestyle brands, anything that's sort of that's to do with like food and nutrition, or where there is that quality of care that people expect, then yeah, it's super important. That you can probably get away with it in a few other industries, but in general, it's right up there.
Okay. So while we're on the topic, when you're like looking to purchase a brand, what are you looking at? That's a huge question.
Yeah, well, actually, the first acquisition that we were looking at, I can't maybe spill all the beans on that one, but what I can say is that it's a web development agency. Different, no, in Shopify, right?
I'm sure. Yeah.
So what we were thinking essentially is that we can actually have a powerhouse, like just a really strong partner that whenever we, launch any other brands, we have them to just build the website, work with us, and do it. I think we've moved more into this idea. Okay, well, we could still have them as a partner without actually owning the company. And I think that just makes us a little bit more focused and streamlined on finding the brands that look good and just focusing on the brands that like as the main acquisition focus.
So are you looking more at the numbers of like their margins and all the stuff we've been talking about this whole conversation when you're buying these brands?
Yeah, so we'll look at. I mean, there's a few factors. You know, it's not there's a well. First of all, there's a few ways to actually acquire the companies. So it depends whether we kind of do it through VC funding, which is what we've been looking for at the moment, or we're doing it financed through debt, so like from the banks. That's the first thing. So if it's from the banks, there's going to be a little bit more of a time pressure as to when we pay that back. So what that means is that we're actually having more. We just have to have higher margins. Basically, it's got to look good, kind of on paper. With the VCs, the advantage of that is it will, maybe there'll be more. The disadvantage is they might be more involved with what we're doing. But what it also means is that if we see a brand that it might have a ridiculously high multiple, but if it still looks good on paper, and we can see the potential of it, they'll sort of let it slide that it will take, 5+ years to get the kind of recuperations on it.
Gotcha. So if a VC fund were to work with you on this, wouldn't they also get equity?
Yeah, they would.
Or is that not categorically? Oh, okay. Okay. Interesting.
It depends how we structure the deal, but typically there'd be equity as well as an additional payout when we would sell the brands, which is kind of the longer term vision.
Okay. Cool.
But that will take some. That's a long time.
All right. So, I want to go back to new e-commerce companies. I actually didn't mean to leave that subject yet, but here we are. When a company's first starting out, once they have finished the product development, right, and they've got, they know they're happy with it. They've maybe run some test ads and they've had success in a morally ethical way, of course.
Yeah, naturally.
How should they go about building their customer base? Is paid ads the first thing that they should do? How much should new brands be prepared to spend on that? Kind of like what do the first steps look like to growing a company, an e-com company?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, the first step, like the absolute fundamental before you even kind of getting to the brand building side, is really understanding that customer that you're trying to reach. So, what is the reason they're actually buying the product from you in the first place? Is it because it looks good? Is it because they're going to lose weight? What is the sort of driving factor that's actually making them purchase? And in general, there should be some level of understanding around what it is that you're trying to do, like why people would even buy the product in the first place. In terms of the strategy for the campaign or like to build the brand, I like to recommend actually starting to build up the socials a little bit and see what the traction is there first, because you can get a fairly good gauge of how well people are going to respond to a product organically, right? Just posting stuff on Instagram, trying to build up some following there, and you can already build that community and actually build the brand. And maybe 3 to 6 months down the line, you have like a few thousand people following your stuff. They know what you're selling. They can actually give you feedback, so that when you launch the ads, it's almost just like multiplying the effect that you've had with the organic. But I think if you don't kind of get that organic piece in first, then the paid ads just doesn't quite click.
That makes sense. Organic is really tough though right now. I mean, maybe not on TikTok, but it's like a really tough game to be in right now. And I know a lot of e-commerce owners that are really struggling in that effort. I don't know if this is your area of expertise or not, but do you have any tips for that?
Well, I think the main thing, so yeah, it's definitely the case. So you're speaking to just Instagram in general, like the reach is just going down. It's harder to reach the same proportion of your audience as it was before. I think in part just because there's a attention fatigue that people have. There's a million and one things they could be doing. They're only over time going to be following more and more accounts. And I think it just gets to a point when, creators' accounts just kind of get pushed down the story list. Reels has been doing really well. That's been a major Instagram update. I know people have been having a lot of success with the Reels. But the main thing is just, posting really good content, like really like well thought out, shareable content. At the end of the day, if you can have great content, people will respond to it. And if you're putting that out at least relatively consistently, it's going to snowball. It just may take a little bit longer than maybe it would have done a few years ago.
I'm going to ask you every marketer's least favorite question. How often should people be posting on social media? Or not people, these brands. Like you said, relatively consistency. Like what's the I know there's no number, right? But like what's the framework? How do you think about it?
I mean, I guess there would be some variation just in what you're trying to do as a brand, right? Like I would imagine, let's say like a luxury brand, they want to make sure that every time they post something, it's an iconic photo. So Prada, they've probably got a ton of content. I don't know what their strategy is exactly, but they want to make sure that each post is special. So for them, it might be a few times a week even. But in general, once a day, I think is a good target. Twice can be fine when you're starting out and you're just trying to grow. It really just depends, also I think just understanding what your capacity is. Let's say if you're a creator to create content, right? Like if people are saying put out 4 posts a day, if that means that the quality has to be reduced, then it's not good. So I guess my answer would be, as many as you can without the quality being severely reduced.
Severely reduced. Reduced is fine. Just not severely.
A little bit of reduction. Well, yeah, a little bit of reduction is okay, I guess. Yeah. But in general, actually, yeah, the main thing is having that good content rather than just pumping it out as much as humanly possible.
Sweet. Okay. So now that they've got their first few customers, they've got, a decent sized following on social media, and they're starting to run paid ads. Is the next challenge then scaling those ads, or are there other challenges in between there that I'm missing?
Yeah, so I guess that's a good time to get a sense of what the customer journey's like, right? Like you might be testing subscription model, or you're just offering the product, for one time. So then you can kind of start to get some feedback, like what is the return rate of the product? How many times are these customers ordering it again? You're kind of getting, maybe after 30 days, you'll start getting to that point as well, or like even a little bit longer. So, you start to get a sense of what the experience is like for the customer. And I think the better sense you can get of that, the more then you're at a better position to say, okay, now we can start kind of pumping the money into the ads. But for example, repeat customer rate, that is essential to knowing how hard you can scale with the ads. So you do want to get some feedback first before just going all in on it.
That's interesting. So before you scale the ads, you want to make sure that you can increase that lifetime value to the point where you know exactly how much you can scale the ads. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and also just having a good sense of like just the whole journey for the customer. So there's nothing that's like that. There's no surprises essentially. If you suddenly selling a few hundred a day and you find out that there's like a design flaw with a product, or there's just some complication that you hadn't quite accounted for, that's better to do that on a smaller scale. I'm talking like around 50 than in the hundreds and or the thousands. That's where it can get a little bit messy.
I'm curious, what do you think about like Facebook and Instagram Shop? I think they released it maybe a year ago, and I thought it was going to like absolutely take off, and maybe it did, and I just don't know about it. But do you know what I'm talking about? And B, what's going on with it? Is it relevant?
Yeah, it's so Instagram Shop. I believe it's available for people that have got 10K followers or more. Is it the same as this? I believe it's the same as the swipe up in that.
I think so.
Yeah, we'll have that as an option when we run the ads, so it can convert well. But ultimately, if the Shopify store's optimized, as advertisers, we'd rather get them on the website, because we know that we can actually retarget them much better. We can get them seeing the whole experience, not just the Instagram ads. I mean, it works too, to be fair.
Okay. So when you talk about optimizing a Shopify store, this is a whole other thing, and I don't know if we have time to get fully into it, but are there any, quick tips that you could give for optimizing a Shopify store to convert better or anything like that?
Yeah. First thing, optimize for mobile. Mm-hmm. If you're sending traffic to a website, it's over 90% of people are viewing it on mobile. So you want to really, most websites you design it as a website, right? But ultimately, the most important thing is how does it look on mobile. The second thing is just to keep it really simple. Large text, clear images. Probably, if you think it's a little bit complicated, the website, it definitely is. The less options and things that can distract someone from buying the product, the worse. So you just want to have a simple, just almost dummy proof. So you got the product, you've got the call to action button. There's nothing else that can sort of divert their attention. And the last one I'd say as well is just having a good website speed. Super, super important. If people are, still waiting for the website to load for 5-6 seconds, then as you know, then it's then people get bored quickly.
And that's actually becoming more important, not less. Actually, everything you just said is becoming more important. But especially if one of your channels that you're getting traffic from is SEO, search engine optimization, appearing organically. We're recording this podcast on June 9th. I think it's somewhere in the middle of this month. We're expecting Google to release an update that prioritizes site speed as one of the key factors that ranks a website. It was going to be in May, but they ended up pushing it back because everyone's panicking. But the site speed thing is huge, not just for conversion rate, but also for SEO.
Is that something that they've, so obviously it is a factor, they've just kind of bumped it up as priority factor number one, essentially? Or
probably not number one, but I think they're making a whole thing out of it, right? I think they've been teasing it for 6 to 8 months or something like that. And it's because they're making a big deal about it, and they don't normally make a big deal about what they're going to update. Right. Normally it's a huge surprise, and we're all oh, why is everyone's traffic dropped?
Yeah.
The fact that they're making this big of a commotion is okay, they're probably pretty serious about it, so we should get our affairs in order. Yeah.
Well, what the other thing as well, when you have you kind of have these algorithm updates, and what you also might start seeing is some people saying, okay, we've got, we've hacked the algorithm, guys. We've reversed engineered the algorithm. I don't know if you've heard that one before.
I've heard that one.
If you do, then you should run for the hills, because no one's reverse engineering Google's algorithm. It's it's just kind of preposterous. So there's so many intricacies to it that we can have guesses, but we're still more or less in the dark, of what's really the levers that are being pulled.
Anytime someone tells you that they're smarter than Google or Facebook, you really got to make sure that this person is legit, because it's probably not true.
Yeah, I mean if that's one thing to summarize from the talk, it's just trust the algorithms and
unfortunately
the computers.
Fair enough, man. Well, hey, dude, this has been so cool. Thank you so much. There's so many questions I've had that you've helped me enlighten my thinking on, and I'm sure people listening have as well. Where can people follow you?
So I'm on Instagram, Anthony Veryard, Veryard, and the same on LinkedIn as well. You can also find me on Ghost Media, so that's just ghostmedia.io, and that's where we actually run the Facebook and influencer marketing campaigns. So yeah, come say if you want to say hi, feel free to send me a message.
Awesome. And you'll have to let me know where you end up traveling to after your 3-month break is over.
Before I get
maybe we'll link up again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome,
Yeah,
man.
man. Well, enjoy Guatemala. It sounds like, or wherever you end up in South America.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.